When John turns his vision toward the spiritual heights and beholds the apocalypse, he is not witnessing an event locked in the distant future, nor merely describing cosmic symbolism. He is perceiving the great drama of the awakening human being, what Steiner repeatedly calls the path of the eye as it rises toward its true stature. The apocalypse is not only revelation, it is initiation. It speaks simultaneously of the cosmos, of the human soul, and of the forces shaping the next stages of evolution. And because John sees this drama from the vantage point of spiritual objectivity, his words carry the tone of necessity rather than imagination. They depict what humanity must become, what it must overcome, and what it is destined to reveal. Steiner often explains that the human eye, in its present form, is still young, still searching for itself in thought, still struggling to bring moral substance into the will, still learning to transform feeling into a vessel for higher knowledge. The Apocalypse is the book in which this struggle is written in imaginations, pictures that contain far more than symbolic meaning. These pictures are spiritual realities that stand behind the development of the world. When John sees the Son of Man surrounded by the 7 lampstands, he sees not a heavenly figure in isolation, but the future form of the human eye, radiant and self-illumined, bearing within itself the creative power once attributed only to the gods. Behind the striking images of seals, trumpets, beasts, and the New Jerusalem stands a central spiritual law, that the human eye must awaken, and in its awakening it must transform the very forces that once threatened to overwhelm it. The Apocalypse reveals that humanity is not simply passing through historical time, it is passing through a spiritual initiation. The events described by John are not catastrophes in the earthly sense, but necessary purifications and unfoldings, stages through which the human being must pass in order to gain freedom, clarity, and mastery over the powers that influence its destiny. Steiner emphasizes that John's vision speaks in the language of the cosmos, for the cosmos itself is the teacher of the eye. The 7 letters to the churches portray the present human condition, distracted, confused, wavering between materialism and spiritual longing, yet still carrying within the spark of something that cannot be extinguished. These letters describe the soul as it stands now, with its virtues and weaknesses, its temptations and possibilities. They hold up a mirror in which the human being can recognize what must be purified in order to step into the world of the seals. For the seals belong to the next stage of the soul's journey. When the seals are opened, what was once hidden within the human being begins to reveal its true form. The white horse, the red horse, the black horse, these are not external events but revelations of forces that live in the astral body and must be transformed by the growing eye. The Apocalypse shows that the human being will only truly awaken when it confronts what lives unconsciously within. The transformation of these forces is the work of future humanity, and John reveals it as a cosmic necessity. In this sense, the Apocalypse is not addressed only to those who lived at the time of early Christianity. It is addressed to us. It is a prophetic guide for the epoch of the consciousness soul, an epoch in which the human being must learn to stand upright inwardly, surrounded by forces of confusion, temptation, and division. The beasts that rise from the sea and the earth are not mythical animals, but powers that seek to harden or distort the human eye. Steiner shows that John recognized these forces as spiritual realities that must be overcome through awareness, through moral courage, and through an eye strengthened by the Christ impulse. As John's vision deepens, he is led into a realm where the human being encounters the true scale of its destiny. Steiner explains that what John sees as cosmic images corresponds to inner transformations that every soul will one day undergo. The seals, the trumpets, and the bowls are not sequences of external disasters, but successive unveilings of the human interior, layers of the soul which, when purified, allow the eye to rise into its own spiritual light. The Apocalypse describes this purification in imaginations, for only imaginations can contain the magnitude of what must awaken within humanity. The opening of the seals reveals what slumbers in the depths of the astral and etheric organizations. The white horse signifies the spiritual will that strives toward truth. The red horse reveals the forces that seek conflict and division. The black horse manifests the burdens of materialism that weigh down the soul. These pictures correspond to real powers that shape human life even now. They work through social antagonism, through the temptation to dominate, through the narrowing influence of purely intellectual thinking. John beholds these forces not as abstractions, but as living beings. In doing so, he reveals the task of the eye, not to flee them, not to fear them, but to transform them through conscious moral insight. Steiner often repeats that the human being is far more entangled with cosmic forces than it appears. The Apocalypse makes this entanglement visible. Every step of spiritual evolution requires the soul to confront the forces that bind it. When the eye becomes strong enough to face these forces, the seals open. When the eye can illuminate them, the trumpets sound. When the eye can redeem them, the bowls pour out their transformative fire. These are not punishments. Steiner emphasizes this repeatedly. They are the awakening processes of a humanity growing into its spiritual adulthood. The trumpets, with their intensification of inner conflict and outer tension, depict the struggle humanity faces when the eye begins to realize its responsibility. As consciousness sharpens, so too does the experience of opposition. What once seemed harmless becomes dangerous. What once seemed external is recognized as internal. John's vision of storms, earthquakes, and burning mountains is the soul's experience when it meets its own untransformed depths. The Apocalypse reveals that the world's crises and the soul's crises mirror one another, for both arise from the same spiritual thresholds. In this sense, the Apocalypse is not pessimistic. It is truthful. It portrays the journey of a being that must learn to bear clarity without fear, to carry responsibility without despair, to stand in freedom without losing connection to the spiritual world. The awakening of the eye is not gentle. It is luminous, and luminosity exposes everything. This is why John beholds the figure of the Son of Man at the heart of his vision. Steiner makes clear that this being stands as the future form of the human eye, radiant, commanding, surrounded by the forces of the cosmos, yet filled with compassion. In the presence of the Son of Man, John recognizes what the human being must become. The Christ being is not portrayed as an external savior, but as the living future of humanity, the archetype of the awakened eye. To follow the path of the Apocalypse is to become ever more capable of embodying this archetype. The growing I must pass through stages that require courage. The beasts emerge not as symbols of despair, but as the adversaries without whom freedom could not arise. Steiner explains that the forces symbolized by the beasts sharpen human discernment. They challenge the soul to distinguish truth from illusion, inner freedom from outer compulsion, spiritual insight from imitation. Without these challenges, the eye would remain childlike, sheltered, unable to stand in its own strength. Thus, the apocalypse reveals the path of a humanity that must learn to face its own shadow for the sake of its own light. As John's vision advances, the struggle between the awakening eye and the forces that oppose it becomes more sharply defined. Steiner reminds us that the apocalypse presents not only the trials of humanity, but the tremendous strengthening that emerges when the soul learns to see clearly. John is led to behold those adversarial powers that would, if not recognized, bind the human being to states unworthy of its divine origin. Yet these same powers, when faced consciously, become the very means through which the eye matures. The apocalypse is the schooling of discernment and initiation into spiritual clarity. The beast rising from the sea represents forces that surge up from the collective depths of human emotion and desire, forces that seek to overwhelm individuality and dissolve inner freedom. These forces appear wherever humanity is tempted to lose itself in mass consciousness, in fear-driven movements, in unexamined impulses. The beast rising from the earth, by contrast, carries the colder, more calculating temptation, the mechanization of thought, the hardening of the intellect, the seduction of a life defined solely by the material and the measurable. Steiner emphasizes that these two beasts are not mythic monsters, but very real tendencies that grow stronger as humanity approaches the threshold of spiritual freedom. What John sees as a dramatic cosmic battle is, on a deeper level, the struggle within the human soul between forces of awakening and forces of spiritual sleep. The more the eye strives toward consciousness, the more clearly it perceives what hinders that striving. This is why the apocalypse intensifies in imagery as it progresses. The awakening eye encounters its greatest challenges not at the beginning of its journey, but at its highest stages. Freedom is born only when the soul can distinguish its own voice from all other voices, when it can recognize both deception and truth with equal clarity. Yet in the midst of these trials, John also perceives a sustaining presence. The Lamb stands at the center of the apocalypse, not as a symbol of vulnerability, but of spiritual power, united with love. Steiner describes the Lamb as the image of the cosmic eye that has already passed through suffering and emerged transformed. It is the Christ impulse in its gentlest yet most potent form, the force that enables the human eye to awaken without being crushed by the weight of its own weaknesses. The Lamb is the assurance that the human being is not abandoned to its struggles. It is accompanied, strengthened, and called inwardly toward its true destiny. When John beholds the 144,000, he sees those souls who have opened themselves to this inner guidance with such devotion that they carry the seed of a future humanity. Steiner explains that this number is not literal, but qualitative. It signifies the human capacity to choose consciously, to align the eye with spiritual truth, rather than external compulsion. These souls represent the first fruits of a humanity that will one day be able to stand openly in the world of spirit, bearing within themselves the forces that now shine only dimly in the human heart. As the vision continues, John sees the battle of Michael against the dragon, an event Steiner describes as both cosmic and inward. Michael's victory is not merely mythological, it is enacted within every soul that learns to confront the forces of illusion with courage and clarity. The dragon's fall from heaven signifies that these forces can no longer remain hidden. They must be met consciously on earth. Humanity, in the epic of the consciousness soul, becomes the battlefield on which this confrontation unfolds. And every human being who seeks truth contributes to Michael's victory. Through these images, the apocalypse reveals that the awakening of the I is not a passive process. It is a path that demands courage, clarity, and devotion to truth. The more the soul grows, the more it must carry its own light into regions where confusion and darkness once prevailed. As John's vision carries him further into the spiritual world, he is led to behold not only the forces that oppose the awakening of the I, but also the sublime realities that call the I forth toward its future. Steiner explains that the apocalypse at its deepest level reveals a cosmic pedagogy, the higher worlds teaching the human being what it must become through the very images it beholds. The soul is shown both its adversaries and its destiny, so that it may learn to stand freely between them. Nowhere is this more evident than in the opening of the seven bowls and the emergence of the great purification that follows. The bowls pour out transformative forces that shake not only the earth, but the very foundations of human consciousness. These images, Steiner tells us, describe what occurs when the I begins to illuminate the deeper layers of the astral and etheric bodies. What once lay concealed, impulse, fear, rigidity, pride, must rise into awareness. The soul is confronted with its own unpurified capacities, not to punish it, but to enable transformation. Just as metal must pass through fire to become strong, so must the soul pass through the unveiling of its own depths. These intense apocalyptic pictures portray this inner catharsis. Yet, John is not left standing before destruction. He is led to behold the forming of something entirely new, the moral forces that arise when the I recognizes its kinship with the spiritual world. The songs of those who stand on the sea of glass, the voices of beings who proclaim justice and truth, these represent not distant angels, but future qualities of humanity itself. Steiner explains that the apocalypse reveals the moment when the human I becomes transparent to the divine, when it can sound with its own voice, yet harmonize with the cosmic order. This is not submission, but freedom, the freedom to will in accordance with spiritual truth. It is at this point that John sees the great harlot and the city of Babylon, images that Steiner interprets as the culmination of humanity's attachment to material power, illusion, and self-deception. Babylon is not a location, but a condition of soul. The soul that seeks external grandeur while losing its connection to the spiritual world. In this picture, John is shown the fate of a humanity that forgets its higher calling. He sees what occurs when intelligence becomes severed from morality, when power becomes detached from wisdom, when culture becomes separated from spirit. These images are warnings, not threats. They show what the I must overcome within itself and within the world. But immediately after the fall of Babylon, John beholds a contrasting image, the marriage of the Lamb. Steiner calls this one of the most profound imaginations in all of spiritual literature. It reveals the moment when the human soul, purified through trial, unites with the cosmic I, that has guided it since the beginning of time. This union is the true destiny of humanity, not absorption into divinity, but conscious partnership with it. When the soul becomes capable of reflecting divine wisdom freely, when love becomes its inner nature rather than an aspiration, then it stands at the threshold of a new cosmic stage. The Apocalypse portrays this union with overwhelming majesty, for it marks the transformation of the human being into what it is destined to be in future epochs. In the vision of the rider on the white horse, John sees this destiny in living form, a being whose word is truth, whose sword is clarity, whose robe is dipped in the sacrifices of love. Steiner teaches that this figure is the Christ, as he will be perceived by a humanity capable of spiritual vision. It is the Christ who awakens the eye, who strengthens it to confront all shadow forces, who transforms its weakness into power. This image reveals what the human being will one day behold inwardly, not a distant Savior, but the archetype of its own highest nature. Through these images, John is initiated into the recognition that the path of humanity is both a cosmic and an inner drama. The Apocalypse shows that every transformation of the world corresponds to a transformation of the soul. The battles, the purifications, the revelations, these are the great mirror in which the human eye learns to see itself. As John is carried further into the cosmic vision, he witnesses the culmination of all earthly struggles in the image of the millennial peace. Steiner explains that this 1,000 years is not a chronological period, but a spiritual state, an imagination of the soul when the forces opposing the sky have been transformed rather than denied. In this picture, the soul experiences a foretaste of its future harmony with the cosmos, a condition in which clarity shines without distortion and the will acts without inner contradiction. It is a moment in which the human being senses, however faintly, what it means to be fully awake. Yet even this harmony is not the end. John then sees the release of the adversary for a short time, a profound imagination Steiner interprets as the final testing of the mature I. For once the soul has gained strength and clarity, it must prove that these have truly become its own. No spiritual gift is valid until it has been transformed into inner capacity. The Apocalypse shows that the I must become capable of choosing the good freely, even when external support has withdrawn. This final test is the seal of genuine freedom. Without it, humanity could not truly stand in the spiritual world as an autonomous being. In this sense, the Apocalypse is not a story of terror, but of liberation. And after this test, John perceives the beginning of something entirely new, a new heaven and a new earth. Steiner emphasizes that these words do not refer to the destruction of the physical world, but to its metamorphosis. The earth, which once served as the school of the human eye, becomes the field upon which a future humanity will reveal its spiritual maturity. Just as the physical body is transformed by the purified forces of the soul, so the earthly cosmos will one day reflect the transformed forces of humanity. The Apocalypse reveals that the destiny of the world and the destiny of the human being are inseparable. In the descending of the New Jerusalem, John beholds the ultimate imagination of future humanity. Steiner describes this vision as the archetype of a spiritualized human community, one in which each soul shines with its own individuality, yet is fully united with others, through a moral and spiritual harmony beyond anything possible today. The city of transparent gold and precious stones is not a heavenly geography. It is the human spirit made visible. The foundations adorned with gemstones portray virtues crystallized into cosmic substance. The gates of pearl reveal the purified senses, capable of perceiving the divine in all things. The entire vision is the picture of humanity when the eye has awakened completely. Steiner teaches that John is shown this imagination not merely to comfort or inspire, but to instruct. For the New Jerusalem is the goal that must guide the efforts of the present. The human being cannot yet build such a city outwardly, but it can begin inwardly by cultivating the clarity of thought, the purity of feeling, and the strength of will that correspond to the future. Every moral deed, every conscious act of love, every truth born inwardly against the weight of falsehood contributes to the slow weaving of this future form. The Apocalypse reveals this cosmic architecture so that the human eye may know toward what it strives. In the light of this vision, the struggles of the present age take on a different character. The confusion, the upheavals, the crises of conscience that define the epoch of the consciousness soul are not signs of failure, but signs of birth. Humanity is passing through the narrow gate that leads from instinctive spirituality to free spirituality. John's Apocalypse shows that the turmoil of the world is the labor of a new humanity, struggling to emerge. And Steiner emphasizes that every individual who awakens even slightly to spiritual reality contributes to the birth of this future. The final scenes of the Apocalypse contain a quiet but immense truth, that the awakening of the eye is a cosmic event. The human being is not an isolated wanderer in an indifferent universe. Its inner transformation sends ripples through the very structure of reality. When the I becomes capable of love rooted in freedom, when it joins wisdom with moral imagination, when it becomes transparent to the spiritual world, then all creation responds. The Apocalypse is the revelation of this mutual becoming, the cosmos shaping the soul, and the soul shaping the cosmos in return. As the final imaginations of the Apocalypse unfold before John, Steiner explains that the vision shifts from cosmic panorama to the intimate threshold where the human soul stands face to face with its own eternity. The grandeur of stars, cities of light, celestial beings, and cosmic battles gives way to something quieter and yet far more profound. The realization that all these images ultimately speak to the inner destiny of the human eye. The Apocalypse is not merely the story of the world's future. It is the revelation of what the human being must become in order for that future to unfold at all. John beholds the river of living water, clear as crystal, flowing from the throne. Steiner interprets this as the renewed spiritual life forces that will stream through humanity when the eye has awakened to its true nature. The barren places of the soul that once held fear, confusion, or egoism will be irrigated by this inner flow. This river represents the new form of cognition, pure thinking, morally radiant, spiritually permeable, that will arise in epochs to come. It is the future consciousness Steiner calls clair thinking, in which the human being will perceive spiritual reality as vividly as today it perceives the physical world. The Apocalypse shows this not as a distant fantasy, but as an inevitability of evolution. Beside the river stands the tree of life, bearing fruit in every season. Steiner explains that this is the image of the harmonized human soul, in which thinking, feeling, and willing no longer contradict or obscure one another. The soul becomes a living unity, bearing fruit continuously because it is rooted in spiritual reality. This is not an image of paradise regained, but of humanity transformed. The tree is the future human being, serene, creative, upright, and nourishing the world around it. Its leaves, John is told, are for the healing of the nations. Steiner emphasizes that this indicates the future social task of humanity. The awakened eye does not seek its own perfection alone. It becomes a source of healing for all. Then John sees that in the New Jerusalem there is no temple, for the city itself is permeated by divine presence. Steiner highlights this as one of the most radical imaginations in all spiritual literature. It means that humanity will no longer approach the divine from a distance through external forms of worship or inherited belief. Instead, the divine will be experienced inwardly, directly, through the awakened eye. The separation between human and divine consciousness dissolves, not through absorption, but through conscious communion. This is the culmination of the path shown throughout the Apocalypse. The human being becomes a free co-worker with the spiritual world. In this light, the closing words of the Apocalypse, "Behold, I come quickly," take on a deeper meaning. Steiner points out that this is not a statement about chronology, but about readiness. The divine draws near whenever the human soul prepares the inner space for its presence. The more the eye awakens, the more immediate this nearness becomes. In earlier epochs, humanity awaited divine revelation as something that came from outside. In future epochs, revelation will arise from within the eye as moral intuition, as spiritual insight, as creative love. The Apocalypse closes by affirming this future relationship between humanity and the spiritual world. In these final scenes, John also experiences the quiet but powerful gesture of invitation. Let the one who thirsts come. Steiner emphasizes that this is the true tone of the spiritual world, never coercion, never compulsion, but offering. The Apocalypse is a call, not a command. The entire cosmic drama it reveals is, in the end, directed at human freedom. For only a free being can truly unite with the divine. The path of the awakening eye is therefore not the path of submission, but of co-creation. At the threshold of the vision's end, the imagery falls away, and what remains is the essential truth. The future of the cosmos depends on the awakening of the human eye. Every step forward in consciousness, every deed rooted in love, every moment of courage in the face of inner resistance contributes to the great work depicted in the Apocalypse. John's vision is both a prophecy and a promise that the human being, through its trials and victories, becomes the bearer of a new spiritual reality. As John stands at the end of his vision, Steiner shows that he is not merely the receiver of a cosmic revelation, but the first witness of what the fully awakened human being will one day perceive. The Apocalypse reaches its conclusion by bringing John, and through him all humanity, to a threshold where the eye recognizes its own divine origin and future potential. What began as a series of overwhelming imaginations now resolves into a single, quiet certainty. The path of the human being is the path toward spiritual freedom, and every trial described in the Apocalypse exists to awaken that freedom. In the final gesture of the vision, John is shown that the spiritual world does not impose itself upon humanity. It waits for the human heart to open through its own inner striving. The entire cosmic drama he has witnessed is, at its deepest level, a revelation of human dignity. The seals, the trumpets, the beasts, the purifications, the descent of the New Jerusalem, none of these are mere spectacles. They are the imaginations of what the human being must work upon within itself across ages. They are the challenges through which the eye grows steadfast. They are the promises of what humanity will one day become when it has transformed the forces that once opposed it. Steiner emphasizes that John's apocalypse is not a message of fear, but of responsibility. It does not describe a predetermined fate. It describes a field of freedom. Every picture in the apocalypse shows what occurs when the human eye meets the world consciously or unconsciously. When it meets unconscious forces blindly, they rule it. When it meets them with awareness, it transforms them. When the eye stands awake in truth, it becomes capable of shaping not only its own destiny, but the destiny of the world. The apocalypse reveals that the entire cosmos is waiting for humanity to step into this creative role. In the final promise of the vision, a new heaven and a new earth, the soul hears not a prediction of destruction, but the declaration of a future in which the world will reflect the transformed human being. Steiner explains that this future arises gradually, beginning in the smallest moral acts, the quietest moments of insight, the most delicate stirrings of conscience. Every time the human eye chooses truth over illusion, love over indifference, courage over fear, the future described by John draws closer. The apocalypse does not separate humanity from the divine. It shows the process by which humanity becomes capable of bearing the divine within itself. And so, when the vision concludes, John remains outwardly the same man, yet inwardly transformed. He has seen the cosmic script of evolution, the foundations upon which future epochs will unfold. He has beheld humanity's highest possibility, not as an abstraction, but as a living reality. In his experience, the human eye recognized itself as both the battlefield of spiritual forces and the bearer of their ultimate resolution. Steiner makes clear that this recognition is the beginning of a path that each soul will one day walk consciously. For the apocalypse is not only John's revelation, it is the revelation of the human being. It is the map of an inner journey that leads from confusion to clarity, from instinct to freedom, from isolation to spiritual community. Its images are vast because the destiny of the eye is vast. Its challenges are great because the future of humanity requires greatness. Its promises shine because the human being is meant to shine. In the end, the apocalypse leaves the soul with a quiet yet powerful understanding. The awakening of the eye is the central event of cosmic evolution, and all of world history, all of collective struggle, all of personal experience leads toward the moment when the human being can freely say in full consciousness, I am becoming who I truly am.